26 million people. That is not a tourism milestone, that is a destination. In 2025, the Barcelona metropolitan area received 26.1 million tourists. A number so large it stopped being a success story and became something else entirely, a confession. Because right in the middle of that record, something extraordinary happened. The city's own tourism commissioner stepped in front of the cameras and said, out loud, what no official in Europe's most photographed city had ever dared to say before: Barcelona has reached its limit. There are no more tourists it can absorb. The city is full, not thriving, not growing, full, and yet the planes kept landing, the cruise ships kept docking, the rental platforms kept filling up. And behind the dazzling facade of Gaudí's spires and the golden light of Las Ramblas, something was already fracturing at a speed that no official statement could stop. Here is what they don't show you in the tourism brochures. By 2028, 10,000 legal, licensed tourist apartments in Barcelona will be forced to hand back their permits and close their doors. Not because of a political whim, not because of a protest, because the city government has already signed the order. The licenses will not be renewed. The countdown has already started. And nobody, not the landlords, not the platforms, not the investors, can stop it. But here is the question nobody is asking loudly enough. If 10,000 tourist apartments disappear from Barcelona's streets, will ordinary people finally be able to afford to live in their own city? Or is this radical measure arriving a decade too late, in a city where the damage to the social fabric is already so deep that no policy can reverse it? Before we go further, if you're watching this, you're already part of something small. Behind the Facade is a brand new channel, and every video takes real research and real work to produce. We're not backed by an algorithm or a network, just by people like you. If you subscribe right now, you tell YouTube this channel deserves to be seen, and you help these videos reach people who'd never find them otherwise. It takes 3 seconds. For a channel this small, those 3 seconds are everything. Subscribe, hit the bell, and let's begin. Let's start with the number that started everything. Spain closed 2025 with a record that would have been celebrated anywhere else in the world. Nearly 94 million international tourists visited the country, the highest number in Spain's recorded history. The tourism ministry called it a triumph. But in Barcelona, the people who live there called it something different. They called it the year the city broke. 26.1 million tourists in the Barcelona metropolitan area in a single year. To understand the scale, consider this. The city of Barcelona itself has a population of around 1.6 million people. The metropolitan area, around 5 million. Which means that in 2025, Barcelona received 5 tourists for every single resident. 5 human beings with suitcases, hotel bookings and restaurant reservations for every one person who wakes up there every morning, who has to find a place to park, who waits in line at the supermarket, who needs a doctor's appointment, who pays rent on the first of every month and watches that number climb. 5 to 1. That is not tourism, that is occupation. And here is the detail that changes everything. It was the city's own tourism commissioner who stood up and said what no tourism official in a major European city had said before in such direct terms. The city has reached its maximum capacity. Barcelona cannot absorb more visitors without destroying the very conditions that make it worth visiting. The model is broken. The city has hit the ceiling. Think about what it means when the institution designed to promote tourism starts using the language of emergency management. It means the crisis is no longer deniable. The irony is searing. Barcelona spent 40 years building itself into one of the world's great tourist destinations. The 1992 Olympics transformed the waterfront. The architecture of Gaudí became a global religion. Las Ramblas became the most photographed pedestrian street in Europe. And now, standing at the summit of everything it built, Barcelona looks down and realizes the mountain itself is crumbling under the weight of too many visitors. The record did not feel like success in the Barceloneta, where residents have protested for years against tourists in their stairwells and on their beaches. It did not feel like success in the Gothic Quarter, where the last butcher, the last neighborhood pharmacy, the last school supply shop were replaced by souvenir stores and overpriced cocktail bars. And yet the planes kept landing. The record was broken, and so was something else. Now we need to talk about the 10,000, because this is the number everyone is quoting, and almost nobody is explaining correctly. In November 2023, the Barcelona City Council made a decision that sent shockwaves through the European short-term rental industry. It announced that when the existing tourist apartment licenses in the city come up for renewal, and virtually all of them expire by 2028, they will not be renewed, not reduced, not capped, not renegotiated. They will expire and they will not come back. Over 10,000 tourist apartments, legally operating, fully licensed under current rules, forced to exit the short-term rental market. The mayor called it the most decisive housing measure in the history of Barcelona. And in structural terms, he is right. No major European city has ever moved to eliminate its entire licensed tourist apartment sector in one administrative sweep. Not Paris, not Amsterdam, despite its aggressive restrictions. Not Lisbon, despite its own severe housing crisis. Barcelona is doing something that has never been done at this scale anywhere in Western Europe. The theory is simple. Remove 10,000 apartments from tourist use, and 10,000 apartments become available for long-term residential rent. Increase supply in a city where supply has been suffocated for years, and prices fall. People who are pushed out can come back. That is the theory. And it sounds compelling, right up until you start asking the questions the announcement didn't answer. The first question, what actually happens to those apartments? The assumption is that they automatically become available for residential rent. But that requires landlords to cooperate with a plan that offers them dramatically lower returns. A well-located tourist apartment in Barcelona can generate between 2,000 and 4,000 euros a month in peak season. A long-term residential lease in the same apartment, even at today's inflated prices, generates a fraction of that. The economic logic for landlords points in one direction, and it is not toward lower-income tenants. Some of those apartments will convert to residential use. Some will sit empty. Some will be sold. Some will be converted into medium-term rentals for professionals and digital nomads, a grey category already growing fast as operators hunt for loopholes. And some will simply go underground, operating illegally without a license, exactly as happens in Paris despite massive fines. The second question, is 10,000 even enough in a city where the waiting list for affordable housing runs into the tens of thousands? Barcelona's housing emergency is structural, the product of decades of underinvestment in social housing, aggressive financialization of real estate, and the systematic conversion of the historic centre from a residential neighbourhood into a tourist ecosystem. You cannot undo 20 years of structural damage with 10,000 apartments, even if every single one went directly to a below-market lease, which it won't. The third question, 2028 is not today. It is a horizon. Between now and then, the platforms know what is coming. The landlords know. The investors who poured capital into Barcelona's short-term rental sector know. And they are already moving, some divesting, some litigating, some quietly lobbying for the policy to be softened, delayed or reversed before it ever takes effect. What is certain is this. The announcement itself was a detonation. It confirmed officially that Barcelona's own government considers the tourist apartment model incompatible with a functioning residential city. That is not a regulatory adjustment. That is a verdict, and the trial is not yet over. Walk into the Gothic Quarter today and you'll see something that looks superficially like a city. There are streets, there are buildings, there are people. But look more carefully and you'll see that what you're walking through is not a city at all. It's a stage set, a performance of a city, maintained entirely for the consumption of people who will be leaving in 3 days. The Barri Gothic is one of the oldest urban neighbourhoods in Europe. Its streets follow the grid of the Roman city of Barcino, laid down more than 2,000 years ago. In the 20th century, it was a working-class neighbourhood, dense, loud, alive, with the kind of friction and warmth that only comes from a place where people live their whole lives. There were schools, there were local shops, there were bars where old men played dominoes, and nobody asked you to scan a QR code. Today, the resident population has collapsed to almost nothing. The people who lived there for generations, the working class, the artisans, the shopkeepers, the elderly, were expelled not by a single event, but by a slow, relentless economic pressure that made staying impossible. What replaced them? Tourists. And everything tourists need. Souvenir shops selling mass-produced Gaudí magnets, cocktail bars with overpriced sangria, fast food chains in what were once local businesses, short-term rental apartments above every ground floor bar. The concentration of tourist accommodation in central Barcelona now reaches levels with no parallel in any major European city outside Venice. And Venice is the example everyone in Barcelona is now terrified of becoming. Venice, the most photographed city in the world with fewer than 49,000 actual residents. Venice, a city so thoroughly converted into a tourist product that it can no longer support the basic infrastructure of ordinary life. A graveyard dressed up as a postcard. The mechanism is identical. First, tourist pressure inflates property values beyond what residents can afford. Then, local businesses serving residents are replaced by tourist businesses with higher margins. Then the last residents leave, and the neighbourhood loses the critical mass needed to sustain even basic services. and then the neighborhood dies. It continues to exist as an image, as a backdrop, as a destination, but as a place where people live, it is already gone. The officials call it overtourism. The residents call it something simpler. They call it being made strangers in their own home. Now let's talk about numbers that have no poetic gloss to soften them. Between 2015 and 2025, residential rents in Barcelona rose by more than 70%, not in 1 year, over a decade grinding upward, in a city where wages didn't come close to keeping pace. The average rent for a two-bedroom apartment in the central neighborhoods crossed €1,800 a month. In the elegant Example, the city's bourgeois heart, the same apartment reached around €2,200. Now consider the median net monthly salary in Barcelona, roughly €1,900 after tax. For someone earning the median wage, renting that two-bedroom in Example means spending more than the entirety of their income on housing alone. This is not a housing market. It is an elimination mechanism. It systematically removes anyone who's not wealthy from the center and pushes them further and further out, to towns 40 kilometers away, where they commute 2 hours each day to jobs that pay a salary that would have been enough to live in Barcelona 10 years ago. The role of tourist apartments here is direct and documented. Researchers consistently find that the concentration of short-term rental platforms in a neighborhood produces statistically significant increases in residential rents, beyond what broader market trends explain. The mechanism is straightforward. Every apartment converted to tourist use removes a unit from residential supply. Reduced supply against constant demand pushes prices up, and the platforms pay more than the residential market can, so the logic for landlords always points toward conversion. The city's own research found that in neighborhoods most saturated with tourist apartments, residential rents ran 15 to 20% higher than in comparable areas with less tourist pressure. The tourist apartment sector was not incidental to the rent crisis. It was one of its engines. And what does this mean for the people living through it? It means a generation of Barcelona-born residents, the children and grandchildren of the people who built the city, who staffed its hospitals, cooked its food, drove its buses, cleaned its hotels, simply cannot live there anymore. They are being expelled slowly by price, in a process that is perfectly legal, perfectly visible, and perfectly unstoppable under current conditions. One survey found that the majority of young, lower-income Barcelona residents had seriously considered leaving the city in the previous 2 years. Not because they wanted to, but because they could not see how they could afford to stay. Not because of crime, not because of pollution, because the rent had become a weapon and they were on the receiving end. In late 2024, Barcelona raised its tourist tax, presented as part of the response to the housing and overtourism crisis. The message was clear: come as a tourist, pay more, and the revenue goes toward housing. The tax now stands among the highest in Europe, reaching up to €7.50 per person per night in the top tier. The industry objected, the platforms objected, and the residents? Most were skeptical, not of the tax, but of whether the money would ever reach them, because here is the uncomfortable mathematics. At current visitor volumes, the tax brings in hundreds of millions of euros a year, a real number, a significant one. But against a housing deficit, measured in tens of thousands of units, against a social housing stock that covers a fraction of demand, against the cost of building genuinely affordable housing in one of the world's most expensive real estate markets, the revenue is a band-aid on a wound that needs surgery. And the tax does not deter the tourists who do the most structural damage. The visitor spending 3 nights in a 5-star hotel is not the driver of resident displacement. The damage comes from the short-term rental sector, the platforms, the investor-owned apartments optimized for nightly yields, the conversion of homes into tourist infrastructure. And no tax, however high, changes the basic calculus that makes a tourist apartment more profitable than a family's lease. The tax is real, the signal it sends is meaningful, but as a solution, it is closer to performance than to policy. So here is what Barcelona's government believes will happen. 10,000 tourist apartments lose their licenses. One by one, they return to the long-term residential market. Supply rises, rents fall, or at least stop climbing. The hollowed-out neighborhoods slowly recover something of their residential character. The families who left come back. It is a compelling vision. And in the long run, with genuine political will and real investment in public housing, credible researchers believe it could help. But here is what is likely to actually happen. The licenses expire over a period stretching to 2028, and during that transition, the legal battles begin. Platform operators and landlords have already announced their intention to challenge the policy in court, arguing it amounts to an unlawful expropriation of legitimately acquired rights. The cases will wind through the Spanish courts. Some will reach Europe. The timeline is measured in years. And while the lawyers fight, the platforms adapt. Long before 2028, the sector has been developing workarounds that fall outside the licensing framework. Monthly rentals, digital nomad packages, medium-term leases of 31 days or more, all sitting in a regulatory grey zone. As tourist licenses expire, many operators won't convert to long-term residential leases. They'll pivot to these grey zone categories, extracting returns still far higher than a regulated lease would produce. And there is the ghost of what happened elsewhere. Amsterdam introduced a strict 30-night annual cap on short-term rentals. The result was not a collapse of the market. It was a massive expansion of illegal listings. Tens of thousands of nights transacted illegally despite the rules, while the city poured resources into enforcement it could barely sustain. Paris introduced its own restrictions. Lisbon introduced its own. In every case, the pattern repeats. Policy tightens, the market finds the loopholes, enforcement struggles, and the structural imbalance between tourist yields and residential yields keeps pulling capital into the sector at a rate that regulation alone cannot stop. None of this means Barcelona's policy is doomed. It means the policy is necessary but not sufficient. The 10,000 licenses are the first brick of a wall that needs many more bricks. Massive investment in social and public housing, aggressive municipal acquisition of property, real enforcement with real consequences, and a long-term strategy that permanently separates the economics of housing from the economics of tourism. Without all of that, revoking 10,000 licenses will be a bold move that produces a modest improvement. Some apartments genuinely return to the market. Rents soften slightly in the most saturated neighborhoods. A few priced-out families find options they didn't have before. But the young Barcelonans considering leaving will still be considering it. The Gothic Quarter will still be mostly hollow. The gap between the city and the brochures and the city its residents actually live in will narrow slightly, but it will not close. Because the deeper problem is not the 10,000 apartments. The deeper problem is that the city allowed itself to become economically dependent on a tourism model that hollowed out its own social fabric and then waited until the hollowing was nearly complete before trying to reverse it. Barcelona is looking in the mirror right now, and the reflection is uncomfortable. For decades, its identity rested on a paradox, one of the world's great cities for living, and simultaneously one of the world's great cities for visiting. For a while, both were true. And then, at some point nobody can pinpoint, the second began to consume the first. The residents marching through the Barceloneta with signs that say, "Tourists go home," shooting water at strangers on their doorsteps. They are not against tourism. Many of them work in it. What they are against is a system that turned their city into a product while they are still trying to live in it as a home. A system that values the revenue from 3 days of tourist, spending more than the stability of a family's 10-year tenancy. The 10,000 apartments are a symbol, a powerful one, a necessary one. But symbols alone do not rebuild a city. What Barcelona is really facing is a question that goes far deeper than any licensing policy. It is asking, what is a city for? For the people who live there? Or for the people who visit? The answer its government is trying to give is clear. The city is for the people who live there, and when housing as a right collides with tourism as an industry, the right must win. It may be the right answer. It may even be historically significant. The moment a major European city drew a line and said this far and no further, but the answer came late. And the city it is trying to save is already deeply, structurally, perhaps irreversibly changed. Barcelona is not alone in this. Every city that has made itself into a global tourism destination is watching what happens next here, because Barcelona is the cleanest test of a question urban economists have argued about for 20 years. Can a city that has been comprehensively rebuilt around tourist consumption actually walk it back? Venice gave up. Its population fell below 49,000 and keeps falling. It functions as a museum now, not a city. Lisbon is trying, and its rents remain among the most unaffordable in Europe relative to local wages. Amsterdam is fighting, and its caps have contained but not broken the short-term rental sector's grip. And now Barcelona is attempting something more drastic than any of them. Not a cap, not a limit, but an expiration, a hard stop. If it works, if the apartments genuinely return, if rents soften, if displaced residents come back, if the Gothic Quarter becomes a place where people live again, Barcelona will prove that it is possible, even this late, to reclaim a city from the logic of tourism. If it fails, if the loopholes multiply, the enforcement collapses, the rents stay impossible, it will prove something else, that there is a point of no return. We do not yet know which story Barcelona is in. The licenses don't expire until 2028. The courts are still hearing the cases. The platforms are still testing the limits. But right now, in 2025, with 26 million annual visitors and a tourism commissioner who has officially declared the city full, Barcelona is exactly where this video says it is. A breaking point. Not a broken city, not yet, but a city at the edge. One that has chosen to believe it can put itself back, while its residents watch with exhausted hope to see whether their government's most radical housing gamble will be enough to give them back what they never should have been allowed to lose. Walk down Las Ramblas today. Count the souvenir shops. Note the absence of the people who used to live there. Read the rental listings in Example and do the arithmetic against the median wage. And then ask yourself, if this is what a city looks like when it has been sold, piece by piece, to the global tourism market, what does it look like when it tries to buy itself back? Barcelona is about to find out, and the answer will matter far beyond its borders. So tell us in the comments, do you think Barcelona's plan will actually work? If this kind of investigation is what you want more of, subscribe and we'll see you in the next one.